On today's Monday Night Travel, we are joined by Afar Magazine editorial director Sarika Bansal for an ethical safari in her adopted home of Kenya. With Sarika as our guide, we explore Kenya's Maasai Mara in ways that protect wildlife, respect local peoples, and strengthen their communities. We enthuse about lion and elephant sightings, as well as Kenyan animals beyond the Big Five, like gravy zebras and the reticulated giraffe. And we learn how to forge human connections with the people we meet along the way. Then, we round out our safari with a tour of buzzing Nairobi and a trip to Kenya's tropical coastline. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves here. My name is Emily Burks, and I am delighted to be your host this evening as we take an ethical safari in Kenya with a very special guest. And without further ado, it's time to begin our ethical safari. And we are so fortunate to be joined by editorial director of Afar Magazine, Sarika Bansal. Sarika, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are very excited to have you. And I know we have some Rick Steves staff watching tonight since everyone's just itching to go on a safari. So thank you so much for joining us. And,
thank you.
So I guess for starters, I was hoping you could tell us a little more about your work with Afar and how your research and reporting for Afar has impacted the way that you show up as a tourist.
So I have been with Afar for 3 years now. And before that, for a long time, I've been a journalist focused on a range of global development issues, ranging from global health to gender issues to education and more. And so my work from a very early age took me to traveling all over the world, putting myself very much far outside of my comfort zones and getting to meet people whose lives looked very different than mine. And I realized that like one thing that just, before I started doing any real work, what first mattered was that initial human connection that I forged and just how I showed up in the place. Was I showing up with an ego or was I showing up with humility? Was I showing up thinking that I had all the answers or was I showing up wanting to learn from people who I was meeting for the first time? So I feel like that attitude kind of like infused in me from luckily, I mean, through a lot of mistakes. I'm not gonna say that I was like perfect and I still make a lot of mistakes. But definitely just sort of came just I feel like developed over time and then I eventually sort of transitioned into working directly into travel. Through Afar, I've had the opportunity as working as an editor. I often work with other writers who, live and work around the world. And so I think a lot about the language that we use when we talk about other peoples, other cultures, other traditions, and how we can just talk about those with dignity as much as possible and just afford people the basic, just goodness. Because I think that's such an important quality when you are traveling and showing up and going anywhere new. But then I have had the opportunity also to go several places myself, both within Kenya to visit several safari lodges, which we'll talk about, of course, as well as other places that have also stretched me far outside my comfort zone. As you know, it was recently in Nepal where I hiked up to Everest Base Camp, which like both physically, emotionally, culturally, like took me so far outside of anything that I had done before. And I'm just so like just really thankful for those opportunities to just continue to stretch and grow. And I just feel like that's just the ultimate gift that travel can give anybody.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I love that you say that you made some mistakes along the way, just because I think that is a skill that can be learned and built. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But thank you for sharing. It sounds like you have already had a very busy year and summer. And I was reading your bio on Afar, and I noticed that in the last line you mentioned that you are now living in a cottage in the forest in Nairobi. So I was wondering if you could tell us how you ended up there.
Yeah. So, well, to be clear, I'm adjacent to a forest, although sometimes there's a lot of monkeys from the forest that come into my backyard. And if we leave a window or door open, we'll come into the house and steal bananas, which, I mean, come on, that's like the most obvious thing a monkey can steal. You can get a little bit more creative than that. But so I moved to Nairobi in 2017 with my husband. We had been living in New York City for a long time and just needed a bit of a change. I guess we could have gone to Brooklyn, but we decided to just again just stretch ourselves and try something new. He works in clean energy, and his company was opening an office in Nairobi, and so basically that allowed us the opportunity to go there at the time. So before Afar, I started and I ran for several years a digital magazine focused on a range of global development issues. And I had the opportunity to just kind of do that from anywhere. And so I thought, okay, well, we'll try Nairobi. If it doesn't work, we can always move back. We're lucky to have a safety net of our families. And but if it does work, then maybe it's something that would be, a nice change of pace. And it turns out to be a really lovely place to live. Since then, we've had a daughter she's now 4, and it's a really lovely place to raise a family as well. Yeah, we have a lot of green space, great weather, and just the people are just so there's just such a culture of hospitality and of warmth, which I think has just been really nice for this season in my life.
Yeah, oh, that's so beautiful, and I'm jealous of your daughter growing up and getting to see monkeys in her backyard. I'm sure she loves that. That's yeah, sounds beautiful. Well, seeing that you are both in travel journalism at this moment and now a Kenya resident, I am very much looking forward to picking your brain tonight and hearing all of your safari recommendations and insights. So on that note, I will turn it over to you, Sarika.
Okay. Yeah. So, and as we had discussed, very much intend for this to hopefully be a conversation, and I'm also looking forward to the Q&As at the end to just get a sense from everyone of where they're at, and how I can use this time to hopefully convince you that it's not as intimidating as you think to think about going to Africa, or to think about going to Kenya. So let me share my screen here. Are you able to see it? All right.
Yes, looks
Yes.
good.
Okay, great. So I'll just offer a few tips uh, and guides about how I think about traveling ethically on safari. Of course, am talking specifically about Kenya throughout this presentation, but everything that I say pretty much can apply in some way, shape, or form to other parts of the continent where safari is popular, such as Tanzania or South Africa or Uganda. Those safaris to have in many parts of the continent. So just to give some basic context, Africa is made up of 54 countries, and Kenya is the one highlighted in orange here. It is in East Africa. It's right on the equator. Nairobi is basically, I think, 3 degrees south of the equator, but it's not that hot because we're at altitude. It's higher than Denver. It's about 6,000 feet above sea level, specifically Nairobi, which is the altitude is also why you see so many Kenyan runners, because people are used to training with lower levels of oxygen. But this is it's just one country of many. If you've seen any maps of the true size of Africa, you'll know that you can put China and the US and many countries in Europe into the whole continent. There's still more space for more. So yeah, I always find those maps to be really fascinating. Within Kenya here, this is just a map of the country. So Nairobi, you'll see, is kind of towards the southwest, or yeah, south middle maybe. But and then the Maasai Mara is further southwest, close to the Tanzanian border. On the other side in Tanzania, you'll get into Serengeti National Park, and if you were to go further east, you'll get to what another park that I'll talk about, which is Amboseli National Park, which has amazing views of Mount Kilimanjaro. Mount Kilimanjaro is at the very northern tip of Tanzania, and but you actually get incredibly clear views of it from Kenya, just because you're a little bit further away. But one thing I want to note with this map is just that Kenya is a really large country, and a lot of travelers who go to the same couple of places. I mean, this is true for many places around the world, that travelers tend to go to the same places. But I did want to make a note that there's so many different parks and places to experience natural beauty throughout the country. And the Maasai Mara National Park, they're really just the tip. If you go up towards northern Kenya, you get entirely different types of vistas. You have Mount Kenya, which is the second highest peak in Africa after Mount Kilimanjaro, and just the views around there and everything is just it's quite different, and the types of flora and fauna that you see. And if you were to go west and you get towards Lake Victoria, you have again like just very different types of views. So it is a really diverse country. So just to note that.
Yes,
Yeah,
Sarika, I
yeah,
apologize to interrupt, but
no, not at all.
I was I know you mentioned the climate, and even though it's on the equator, it's still very mild most of the year. What would you recommend timing wise in the year to be the best time to visit on a safari?
Yeah, I mean, safaris are pretty good most of the year. Like, I would say that you'll have a different safari experience depending on when you go because a lot of people tend to go for the wildebeest migration, which I actually haven't seen like the full, like the Lion King style, the thousands of wildebeest running, but that usually takes place between between September and October, and that's a great time to go for sure. It's definitely higher season then. Um, a lot of people also tend to go in like June and July when it's a little bit drier and that's the winter. And so it's a little bit cooler during the day. I mean, I definitely recommend taking some sweaters if you do that because even though the temperature doesn't necessarily get that low, it'll get to like maybe 50, 55, but you feel it because you don't have like insulation and heating the same way that you would in the US. And so like inside you really like you I don't know, at least for me, I feel like I just like need the sweaters. And
Yeah,
then yeah, and then like December, January is another popular time to visit. So yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on like, you end up being able to see different things at different periods because certain periods of time, there's more likely to be births of babies, and other periods of times there's like likely to be like migration, or you'll see certain animals more or less. The only times I would just mention, not necessarily to avoid, also with climate change, it's all been shifting anyway, is the rainy seasons. There's the what's called the long rains are usually April and May. And then the short rain, so there's like two rainy seasons, basically a long one and a short one. So the long one is April and May, and then the shorter one happens in November. Again, like all of that's changed. Like a couple of years ago, there was an incredible drought during April and May. This year, you may have seen in the news, there was just like torrential flooding throughout the many parts of the country, including a lot of the Maasai Mara, like the rivers just really overflowed, and several lodges actually were badly damaged and had to close for several months. So, but that was, I mean, like historic type of flooding, like it was like intense El Nino storms. So, so yeah, so that's so my answer is really like most times of the year are honestly great, and it'll just kind of impact what you end up seeing. I would say if you are interested in booking a trip, if you can, the best thing I would say is like if you can directly talk to a lodge and or to a tour operator or someone, and they can give you a sense of like what you're likely to see then. And so it's like as opposed to thinking about like this is the time to go and this is the time to absolutely avoid, just know that there's just going to be a difference in what you see because it's the natural world. Like the natural world keeps on doing things, and it just changes what it does over the year.
yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned, recommending packing layers and sweaters. Is there any other special safari gear that someone might need to invest in before they, go out on a game drive or anything like that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's so funny. I like often see people, you can like spot the first time safari goers with like all khaki and tan everything, and the bucket hat and the pants that like zip off. In case your right leg gets cold and your left leg is warm, you can like zip one off into shorts. Um, I would say like for the most part, like unless you're doing like a bushwalk where you're really, really getting um into seeing animals super, super close. Like for the standard safari, like you don't really need that type of like specialty outfit. So like I think that a lot of them can be quite expensive, and and to me, they also have like this, some of them have like a bit of a colonial tinge to them. And
Mm.
so I don't know, I've gone to safari wearing like something like this before, with like big chunky jewelry and you know, it's been fine. No animals attacked me in the car. And so yeah, so I'd say clothing wise, like I would say loose, something loose and comfortable because like again, for more standard safari, you are sitting usually in a vehicle for several hours. So you know, you just want to be able to like move around, not have anything that's too tight or constricting since you will be on like bumpier roads. And then if you're going walking, like just make sure to have good shoes, just you know, that have like some good grip to them. So yeah, so those would be like the two main recommendations. Few small things like you know, definitely bringing some mosquito repellent with you and chapstick because these places can be dusty and my lips have gotten so chapped and dry. So and sunscreen as well because the sun can be quite fierce. So those would be a few like on the toiletries side that I definitely always try to pack with me. But in terms of clothing, I think that yeah, as long as you're comfortable, lighter clothes, like lighter color clothes often are good because like even if you go in the Kenyan winter, which is like July, August, the during the day the sun can still be pretty hot, but like lighter color clothes can often be better than blacks and browns. So yeah.
Hmm. Oh, well, thank you. Thank
Of
you for the
course. Yeah, no.
recommendation.
I think you know these are super important because I think for so many people that it also like I think that they think of like the cost and that's often how these safaris are marketed as the like there's like once in a lifetime opportunity, emphasis on once, that you know this like bucket list trip and that's extremely expensive and part of the expense is also thinking about like I have to get all this gear and just knowing that like you know, a lot of it can be more in the recommended category versus the required. Hopefully it's like brings down the intimidation factor.
Yes, certainly. And I think with your tips, you would look a little less like a tourist than than you otherwise would.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah, so that kind of brings me to like just so this is just me and my family on in a safari vehicle in the Maasai Mara. But just, you know, the guiding question that I was thinking of for this time together is just like, is there a way to travel to Kenya or really anywhere else to do a safari and go beyond these stereotypes of, you know, what we talked about with the dress or like with the idea of it being this like really crazy expensive like once in a lifetime bucket list opportunity and also like how can travelers kind of go beyond what are considered the big five safari animals and the kind of the really like most popular things to do and realize that they are and see this the opportunity beyond a safari as an invitation almost to enter this new ecosystem and to really be part of this of a new place and that doesn't just include these like celebrity animals like the lions and elephants but also includes you know many other animals that are there and more importantly the people who live there and who call it home and how can you actually engage with everyone along the way. So here are just a few things that I recommend. None of them are required, but just I hope that some of them, if you were to follow them, would make your time in Kenya a little bit more meaningful. The first thing I would say is to, if you can, this is a picture of me and my daughter that I like. If you can find a local tour operator that is based in Nairobi or elsewhere in Kenya versus someone who is based abroad, that I do recommend doing that. I think that what the biggest thing is that it helps ensure that as much money as possible stays in the country. Some of these tour operators are known to just, you know, take really large cuts and then kind of leave you with second-rate experiences, knowing that you are a first-time visitor and also that you wouldn't necessarily be able to be as discerning between what's like a two-star and a four-star experience. So I think that I think that if you are able to work with a local tour operator who can like really understand you, that would be my first tip. And yeah, and it's like, put your money where your mouth is in terms of the in terms of actually like, showing up with your values. So a couple that I could recommend, one more on the luxury side is called Mikato Safaris. And I think Ben is going to share some links as well while I mention these. And another one is called Twiga Tours. Twiga means giraffe in Swahili. So Twiga Tours is another one, but there's definitely many if you just kind of look around, or even independent operators who can help you craft a trip. It's just like make sure that they're certified in some way, and you can always kind of like get the vibe of a person and try to understand like whether they'll really like make the trip for you the one that you want it to be. So
Yeah, Sarika, so it kind of sounds like you, with some of these tour operators, you can actually speak on the phone with them, or they can help you plan like a pretty customized trip. I know you, just since you mentioned that you can kind of
yeah.
get the vibe of somebody
Yeah. Yeah,
working
I
with
would say
them.
even
Yeah.
through email, like sometimes like
Yeah.
the first touch or the first point of contact is email, right? So you like usually. So I would say even through email, you can kind of get a sense of like if this person is going to do something that is just the standard cookie cutter for everybody, or if they'll do something that really adapts to my needs. And then yeah, I'm sure like for a lot of these folks, I personally, since I live in Nairobi, haven't used any of these tour operators myself. These are ones that I've met before and have been recommended by others. So I do want to make that clear. I'll also say that if you find an accommodation that you like, that a lot of them will kind of help you out because with some of the logistics as well that are required for the trip. So for a safari, the main pieces of the trip, if you were to break it into like its components, are the transportation to and from the park fees once you get to the park, and then the lodging fees. Those are kind of the three, and then assuming it's included, but also like a driver to like take you around. And usually most safari lodges are all inclusive in terms of room, board, and a driver to take you around, but they'll be very upfront if they're not, hopefully. And so yeah, so you can a lot of places will help you out with those logistics because they're happy, like most lodges that I've talked to are really happy to help you arrange everything, because it's just easier for them to do that. And in any case, like a lot of the park fees, like most of Kenya's government services have been moving to like to online. So the including paying for a lot of the the park fees at beforehand before you get there using an app called eCitizen. So that's very possible to do by yourself as well. So there's ways to kind of like DIY different portions of it depending on your budget and depending on your ability to just like handle any of the logistics yourself. So that's always another option.
Yeah, and I guess I was curious. I know we mentioned before that you get a lot of friends and family
Yeah.
asking for your can you travel consulting advice. Would you ever rent or recommend that any of them rent a car, or do you think maybe for first timers it might be better to stick with a local tour
With a
operator
drive.
arranging
Um,
components?
I would, yeah, I like it's totally, I think it depends on the level of adventure people are looking for also. Because there is something so I love doing like long distance road trips and kind of like just like playing music and just like looking out at the scenery, stopping when you want to. And just like there is that freedom in that, which is so beautiful. So I think if people are up for that, they definitely can. I would probably not recommend people like do the game drives by themselves. Like I would just like, and make sure that the lodge is not in a place that is too difficult to reach with the vehicle that you have. So that would be one major thing. But in the Masai Mara, for example, they've actually made the roads like they've changed so much since I've moved to Nairobi till now, that they've really improved. So it's very possible to go even with like a two-wheel drive car, to a lot of places within that are within the law, sorry, within the reserve, and then you can take a bigger four-wheel drive kind of vehicle, to do game drives that go like a little bit, more into the bush and in places that you wouldn't necessarily go to if you're just going from point A to point B.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for sharing. I think that people they think of like this full package when they um, go for safari vacations. And I think, just remembering that you can plan more of these components yourself might make it a little more
Yeah.
budget for people.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
thank you
think
for
when it
elaborating.
just, I'll just say one last thing and then I'll move on, is that I think when it gets slightly more complicated is if you want to visit multiple parks and especially if you want to go to like different countries, like there's many safari kind of tours that I've seen that go from like one park or one or two parks in Kenya and then one or two parks in Tanzania and then they hop over to Uganda and then they finish up in Rwanda with a gorilla adventure thing. And it's those become a lot, but just like when you add more countries in, just because then you have like visa things to think about as well. And every country has like slightly different ways of doing things. Uh, then I would say if you do want to do something that's more multi-country, I would definitely recommend a tour operator to help make that a bit more seamless. But if you can, but again, as I said, like Kenya itself has so much diversity, or if you go to Tanzania, Tanzania itself has so much diversity. I actually think that yeah, I would recommend for a first time person to actually just like pick one destination, like one country, and really just focus on that and really learn the diversity within it because it's just I feel like it ends up being logistically easier and a bit cheaper.
Yes, I have found that anywhere I travel to be
Yeah,
the
yeah, it's so true.
case.
Like, going
Yeah.
like 3 days in France, then hop over to Italy, then go to Switzerland. Like that, it just adds a complexity and logistics.
Yes.
Yeah, it just has to.
Yes. And that used to be the way I traveled, and I've learned from my mistakes. So
Yeah, go for depth as
yes.
opposed to breadth necessarily. Yeah, this is just showing one tented camp that I stayed at the JW. This is in the Maasai Mara, and this is a very high-end property. Just to give a sense of like what's out there. So yeah, so this is one, and I should also mention that the floods, that the Marriott was actually very badly affected by floods. But they've just reopened like literally last week. So yeah, my review for them for the Marriott Masai Mara will be going live on Afar later this week. We were just waiting for them to reopen. But yeah, so yeah, so the first tip was just to find a local tour operator if you can. Second tip is if you can is to go beyond the big five. And yeah, sorry, this is just a picture of a suspension bridge that it can be crossed by foot that I saw in the Masai Mara that I thought was very pretty. So yeah, so of course this is, the star of the safari, the lion, made so popular by the Lion King and so many other things. Lions are amazing. I took this picture. I don't have a DSLR camera, so what I did was a very poor man's DSLR camera, which was I took my phone and I put my binoculars up to it and I focused it a bit and then took a picture like that. But I was able to get a few good shots. And so yeah, so this is a lion mom with a couple of her cubs. And so yeah, that is to say, like lions, so the big five that I've mentioned a couple of times, so they actually traditionally were the big five most prized animals for hunting and for game. And now they've sort of translated now into like what's as like a checklist for people to look for when they're doing game viewing through in safari vehicles. So they include the lion, the leopard, the elephant, the buffalo, and the rhinoceros. So those are considered like the most prized animals to see. However, of course, just like any ecosystem, it does not just consist of these ones at the apex. It consists of many, many across. So just to give a sense, I've actually through doing safaris, and I've been so lucky to do as many as I have learned a lot about birds. And so, yeah, this is the lilac-breasted roller, which is Kenya's unofficial national bird because it has so many different colors that can represent like different people, different culture, different tribes across the country. And so, yeah, so this is another one of my binocular pictures that I took somewhere of that. But yeah, but just like seeing how birds interact with each other and a lot of other animals, I think has been really, really magical. Okay, so this is actually again when we stayed at the Marriott, they have this program. They have a Canon workshop, like Canon meaning the camera company, and so they offer like a 30-minute course in like wildlife photography. My husband got so into it. And so yeah, and then you can use this like Canon EOS camera, which is this ca with a giant zoom lens, which is I think like a $5,000 setup, and you can just use it throughout your time while you're there. And then the in-house photographer, his name is Moses, he's amazing. Then he like helps edit a few of the photos. So we got this is like one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And yeah, these are cats, which were like definitely, everyone's looking for the cats always, but we were really lucky to see these group of cheetahs. First, there was four cheetahs that were playing in the morning. They're just like being, just silly little kids. And then the mom like went out to go like get breakfast for them. And so we just got to see the whole thing. And it was like the first time in 20 safaris that I've like seen the entire process of like, her chase down and like watching a cheetah run. Like, I mean, obviously the stereotype is that they're the fastest runner in the world. Like seeing it in like with your own eyes is kind of incredible. And so just like just doing the sprint to get this baby gazelle, then walking back triumphantly with breakfast. Yeah, no, there's her one of her four babies that was so excited. And then their heart rate goes up so high that she actually stopped to rest and looked directly at the camera for us. And while her babies got to eat first, and that was Mama's turn to get in on the action after her heart rate came down. So this is just a really special moment that I just thought I would share with all of you. Made even more special by the fact that we were able to capture it on such a nice camera that like we didn't have ourselves.
Yeah, so
Uh,
you took all of these, you and your husband took all of
Yeah,
these.
I'll say my husband took all of these. I'm not going to take the credit
Wow.
for it. But yeah,
Yeah.
he took all of these photos, which I was like, it was cool. It was really cool because it like awakened this I mean he had done photography years and years ago, but like it like reawakened this love of photography for him for sure. I have seen, I will say on the flip side of that, like a lot of people just kind of like struggling with all the settings and whatnot, and just like what should the f-stop be and what should my aperture be, and end up like actually not really being present and in the moment because they're so focused on getting the shot. And I actually think that that's a bit of a disservice to where you are, because it's like, how often are you going to be in these incredible vista, like see these things? And sometimes I think it's just better to just like take a quick iPhone photo and then just like use your eyes to enjoy it, and use your ears and listen to it too, because it's all senses. And yeah, so I think that it was really helpful to have a class. So I would say if you are interested in taking a big camera, like if you can take a class or like even watch some YouTube videos before going, that will definitely serve you better than sitting in the safari vehicle, as I've seen many people do, and just like struggling for like 10-15 minutes. And it's still
Yeah.
blurry, it's still dark, it's not a really usable photo.
Yes, and to your point, I think while we were emailing at some point,
Yeah.
there's always Google Images.
Yes, also that. Yeah. Are you really going to get something better than is available on Google Images? Yeah, so just to give a sense of other animals that I've seen, of course, giraffes, which are so tall. This is one of four distinct giraffe species. In the intro, they mentioned reticulated giraffes, which you see in northern Kenya, and then there's a couple of others. You can see the differentiation in their coloring. And again, like the more you do go on safaris and the different places you go, you start noticing and observing these things much more closely, just like you would anything else. Like if you start going to a lot of churches, you start seeing like the different architecture with them. So it's similar, very similar in that way. Oh yeah, this is a funny picture that my husband took. Zebras also get itchy, and so do elephants. Here's an elephant rubbing itself on a tree. And also speaking of birds, these are the gray-crowned cranes. This is a national bird of Uganda, actually, but this is taken in the Maasai Mara with the Canon camera. One really interesting fact I learned about birds is that if you see birds, male and female, that look very similar to each other or almost like indistinguishable from each other, that means they mate for life. So that is the case with the great-crowned cranes. And if you see a bird, peacock is a great example where the male is very, very beautiful and the female's not. That means that it is a polygamous bird. So that was one safari driver taught me that. I feel like through these safaris also, like you end up if you engage with the driver, like, and depending on how, like, of course, it depends on how good the driver and guide is, but if you have a good one and you engage with them, you get to learn so much about animals and the flora as well, and just like the overall like changes, how climate changes change these places. So that's been really fun as well. Just going in with the mindset of someone who's curious and just, approaching it the same way you would any other trip in terms of the types of just asking a lot of questions. Oh yeah, and this is a picture I took actually, so I will take credit here. This is my like real life Simba and Nala moment that I was able to capture. Again, lions aren't the only ones, but they are pretty incredible. And when you take a picture with like, especially with like a good camera, and you zoom in, you start seeing like they are pure muscle, and they are just killing machines. And I think you really start to appreciate that, like, not if you just see a faraway picture, but you start like zooming in on your computer and you're like, oh wow, these things are dangerous.
Yeah, that does make me wonder how close can you really get on a game drive
You
to,
get
to these big cats?
Yeah, so they say that they basically like a lot of these cats are they are obviously wild, but they are habituated in the sense, like, especially in a place like the Maasai Mara, where there are so many, there are so many tourists and there's so many vehicles that come through. But you basically do like you do get very close, and if they see a vehicle, the vehicle itself is like the unit. If there have been cases where idiots have like exited the vehicle in order to like get a picture or like whatever, I don't know. And then they're in trouble because then they can see them as like individual bait. But as long as you stay in the car, which I very strongly, strongly urge you all to do. Everything else is a suggestion. That is a very strong recommendation. Then you should be fine. If you go to a much less touristed park, like we actually went once to this park. It was in northern Kenya called Daiga, which it had been used actually by the British Army for like some exercises, but and there was like a couple of holiday homes there, but like very far spread apart. We drove past this like lone male elephant and heard him like trumpet really loudly. And we were doing a self-drive, so I was just like, and my husband first is just like, "Oh, cool! I want to see it." I'm like, "That sounds really dangerous. Like, just like hit the gas. We gotta go. We gotta go." So that actually, and like later on, I learned that like the situation we were in was actually legitimately dangerous because I think that elephant, because it's not used to seeing vehicles, did probably get a bit spooked by us. So luckily nothing happened. And like, if you're able to like also just know some basic safety over time, if you do a self-drive, then you're able to, you can enjoy these spaces in different ways. Um, and actually, speaking of enjoying them in different ways, this is a picture from my family and I. We love to do car camping, and this is a lot harder for an international visitors to do like exactly what this is, because like so that orange tent is ours, and the car, the RAV4 next to it is our RAV4, and then behind us is Mount Kilimanjaro, which is pretty amazing view to wake up to. And then we were camping. It was like a group of friends and I. This was we were camping at a place called Ellerai, which is a community-run conservancy, which is another type of. So you have like many national parks in Kenya. You also have community-run conservancies, such as this one. This one is both community-owned and operated. And so then you just get to like explore just like broader vistas through like widening your search of where you go. And in this case, like by doing like a self-camping situation, we were able to still have access. They have a tented camp accommodation as well. But we were able to have access to their facilities during the day, most notably the swimming pool, because we had a bunch of kids with us. So that was really great. And yeah, so there are just like many different ways to enjoy these places. And there are also many places beyond the Masai Mara to enjoy. Specifically, I think that the community-run conservancies that I've been able to visit have been really quite amazing. And they have just like such a great story behind them. A couple of years ago, I interviewed the author of a book called Flowers for Elephants, which is about this group called the Northern Rangeland Trust, which is a group of different different communities in northern Kenya that sort of banded together and helped create like larger spaces for animals to roam. So the idea is that basically like through these conservancies, you're able to expand the land, expand the amount of wild space for animals such as elephants and others to be able to actually navigate without then coming into contact with farmland or other things that could impede their roaming ability. So that's what makes them so important, especially like it's just we're able to allow them to have the amount of space that they require and deserve. So that's really quite amazing. And then it was nice to know that like staying in this place, LRI, that we were able to like the money that we paid was like going directly to the community. And then we had a couple of rangers at night since we were just in tents and there were elephants around, that they had a couple of rangers who were walking around and they were also from the community. So that was just really nice that it felt like a much more like tight bond in that kind of way. Um, yeah, so there's many different ways to like enjoy these places. Sorry, quickly jumping back to the Masai Mara is this one camp that I just wanted to give a quick shout out to called Embu River Camp. They're the first carbon neutral camp in the Masai Mara. They were also actually very badly affected by flooding and are working on reopening now, but they have electric vehicles that are solar powered that go through the Masai Mara. They have like this whole vertical gardening scheme. They have just like really it is a company that like from top to bottom, they really speak their sustainability story so loudly. And I think it's just a really nice example of that you can be a traveler who cares about your environmental footprint and really go somewhere that doesn't make a very heavy one. And I think Embu River Camp is a really good example of that. Um, this picture is a map of Kimana Sanctuary, which Kimana Sanctuary it was actually the country's first ever community-run sanctuary that was, I believe, established in the mid-1990s. And so now it is there's a very high-end property that I was fortunate enough to stay at called Angama Amboseli that is on the Kimana Sanctuary land. But this is like this huge copper map. It looked really cool in person. I feel like the photograph is a little difficult to see, but what it's showing is basically it shows Kimana Sanctuary, and then it shows like all of these other through the arrows, all the different paths that the super tusker elephants are able to take as a result of Kimana Sanctuary remaining a sanctuary and not turning into developed land. Basically, so they're able to move from Amboseli to Savo West National Park, all the way up to the Chilu Hills, over to Mount Kilimanjaro. And what's really special about the elephants here, you have these elephants that are called super tuskers that have extremely long tusks that like almost touch the ground, and they're quite rare. So it's just like there's definitely a big effort to preserve them and save them. There's this foundation called the Big Life Foundation that does incredible work in conservation across the country, and they're just worth getting to know, and yeah, getting to see just like what role a community run conservancy can have in that. So that is the next tip. So, oh yeah, here's a picture of a super tusker at sunset with the Mount Kilimanjaro's right behind. So this is a pretty special moment that we're fortunate enough to be able to see. And then here's a couple of other elephants. I think they were part of the super tusker breed, but it's like a young female and a baby. And so yeah, this is just in the morning. Oh, sorry that the text is the same as the last page, but this is the next morning, and we can see the snow-capped Mount Kilimanjaro in the background.
And is
Uh,
that on
this
Kimana
is on Kimana
Sanctuary?
Sanctuary, yeah. So yeah, which is really quite cool to be able to like experience this park that actually is doing so much to be able to expand the amount of space that these animals are able to roam. These are just a couple of pictures of Nkama Masali, which again is another very high-end property. They have, and the reason why I put these in here is because it also shows that like I think there is like a singular image of what a safari lodge looks like, which is very like out of Africa. I feel there's like the white billowing curtains and the dark wood and I think there's a look that people imagine, and many of them do live up to that look because they know that people like it and are looking for it. But then I really do love that like places like Ngama and Boseli were like really just trying to do something a bit different. They have these like concrete walls that are actually they used elephant dung to add texture to them. And so, bringing the elephant theme in because elephants are so, they're like revered in this part of Kenya and are so important. And then you have like these spokes that kind of like each spoke sort of represents like a Maasai warrior stick. So it's just like there was just like a lot of really interesting symbolism throughout the property. And then like really fascinating use of color, which like I just felt like this looks like the like really modern art piece almost. And then the green of the sofa was like supposed to be inspired by the acacia tree leaves that are outside. And then the kind of like rust color you see in the background is supposed to like represent the colors of the earth. So it was like, so it's really kind of like purposeful, very modern design. It may not be exactly to everyone's taste, but I think it's really cool that someone is trying something different. And that like there are safari lodges that they don't all just have to look exactly the same. But like there's
Yeah,
that phrase like on Tuesday we're in like we must be in Belgium or something like that, where it's just like you don't even know where you are because it all starts like blending together. And like this would definitely not be that.
yeah, and I know you said a lot of those kind of typical safari outfits have that tinge of colonialism to
Yeah,
them, and I think that that's kind of what comes to mind sometimes with those tents. So yeah, I
totally.
agree. It's definitely nice to see something different. So thank you
Yeah.
for putting this.
Yeah, I also feel like there's so much amazing like contemporary Kenyan artwork and like, really Pan-African designs that you can draw from in terms of like actually making the physical space feel like, I'm here in 2024, not 1924. And so yeah, so I feel like I really do applaud the folks that are actually taking that, not just doing exactly what everyone else is doing, but doing something, just taking a little left turn and doing something else. The next tip I have is just like whenever possible to just like go beyond the animals. The animals are incredible. I'm not trying to like, take anyone away from getting their animal fill, but also the people are just as amazing. Like I've been I feel so lucky to have been able to have met so many lovely people throughout my travels in Kenya. And yeah, and so that can happen in many different ways. A lot of traditional safari lodges in the Masai Mara will allow you to will have like an evening where Maasai people will come and do like a song and a dance routine. Some places will allow you to like, often pay a small extra fee to go and visit a Maasai village. In this case is actually a bit different, where this is at a place called Majimoto, which is it's not very far from the Masai Mara. It's in this place called the Loita Hills. That and it was like an eco camp set up specifically in order to just like be like ensconced in the Maasai culture. And we signed up for this kind of like a full day Maasai immersion guide. So this was Ben, who is our guide, who like took us up this mountain to go on this lovely walk. And then we also did several different activities throughout the day, including like learning how to like shoot a bow and arrow. So basically we went through like a Maasai warrior training exercises. So there was like learning how to shoot a bow and arrow, learning how to throw spears. And we use pieces of cut sisal for that, which is like, the thick greenery. And we were just using that to practice cutting and throwing spears. We learned how to make a fire with our hands. And then so several things like that. Basically, I was learned that we're terrible at all of them, and one does not become a Maasai warrior in a day at all. But it was really fun. I felt so immersed. And then they did do this group actually did do like the song and dance that is very traditional to the Maasai people. But what was different in this case was that afterwards they actually explained what the lyrics meant, which was so helpful because I don't speak Ma, which is the Maasai language, and I had seen it several times before, and I just never knew what they were saying. They also explained like the significance of colors that they wear and the patterns that they have. So it was really nice to be able to get that kind of like deeper exchange. It is, I think that you do have to search for it a little bit in order to get it, and sometimes it can be a little bit hit or miss. But if you are able to get it is a really, it's such an enriching way to understand that this land has not just been populated by animals, but also by human beings who have developed their own culture and traditions over the last many thousands of years and are living modern lives. And so it's just great to be able to tap into that. This is a picture of one of the song and dances. This was at Embu River Camp. What was cool here was that it was all of the staff like that we had gotten to know over the last several days. And then it was so cool to be able to like, hey, wait, that's Beatrice. And now she's like, dressed in her traditional clothes and now she's like dancing. And so and I think it was really cool for my daughter to be able to also recognize people and just like to be able to like participate in that kind of way. So that was really, so that was very special. And I think that like, being able to like forge that human connection outside of just like watching someone perform and then they go away was also really nice.
Yeah, before we
Yeah.
totally move on here,
No, no.
Sarika, I know you mentioned that the tourist villages in the Masai Mara can be sort of a mixed bag, and if you do a little research, you can end up with more educational, like at ones offering more educational experiences. And I was wondering if there was, any indicators of ones to visit that,
Yeah.
instead of feeling like you're just consuming like an endangered culture, it's you're actually like,
Participating in
yeah,
some
yeah,
way.
participating and learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there any indicators of
Yeah, so it's
yeah.
it's hard to know about the village until you get there because it's like, it usually is a bit of a drive to get to any of them. But what I will say is that it depends a lot on who your driver slash guide is slash interpreter. So
Mhm.
if you have a good one who's willing to, and if you can like talk to them before about what your intentions are and they seem to get it, then I think that like that can change it a lot. I will say still like when you arrive at these places, like, you will be probably like people kind of like come in your face with all of their wares, like their beaded jewelry, which is very common for Maasai people to wear. Beaded jewelry and the like, and we'll just be like, this costs as much. And sometimes like the prices are so inflated from what they should be, but then they make you feel they like there's a whole shtick, like they're making you feel guilty for like wanting to negotiate because even though they're like extremely inflating the prices, because you're an outsider. So that becomes like that does become uncomfortable, and that often can be part of it. Um, I found it helpful like when it's possible um to zig rather than zag sometimes. Like, so once, one of the, like, one really sweet experience that I had once was, and this was entirely due to the fact that our driver was like up for it and he was a great translator, was I started chatting up with some kids who we started like there was like a baby goat around and I was like, how hard is it to catch the baby goat? And I sometimes think something very random like that is a great way in because that's like one of the more random things that I've like gone up to someone and asked them. And so all of a sudden, like everyone was like trying to catch the baby. I couldn't catch the baby goat. And so it's like no one in my group catch the baby goat, but like these kids, like they were able to like just like grab a leg, and then someone was like, no, I'm gonna show you how it's done. And so it kind of like got them engaged in something that they were excited about. And I think that that actually really helped. And then it was also great that it was like, well, they were kids. I mean, they were probably like not, they weren't like so young. They're probably like, teens. But then they ended up like inviting us into like their hut. And this was a little bit like, I mean, we were in the village, the tourist village, but this was like a little bit outside of the program. And so then we went into the hut with their mom and she like showed us how they do cooking. And And that's actually like what my husband's line of work is. So he was like asking questions about like clean cooking and like what the smoke is like. So I think like they were able to just like engage on many different types of levels that weren't just the standard questions that you ask. And I think that like that it's just true with like any human relationships that like if you're able to sort of kind of get beyond that initial the formal what you're supposed to see, and you're able to go beyond that, then you often can get somewhere really nice. It's not a guarantee at all, and a lot of these places, like they do need the money, and they see these tourists that are coming as like, a bank account. So,
Hmm.
it is that part of it is super, super uncomfortable.
Hmm. Yeah, and I like that you noted that if you can kind of maybe surprise people with like kind of a funny question, just break the ice. And I think again that's kind of like a skill to learn and practice, but once you know how to get beyond that with people, yeah, it is pretty crazy how you know people people are very easy to connect with once I think you
Totally. I'm like,
beyond
they're
that.
bored too of doing the same shtick over and over. So it's like, if they
Yeah.
see that you're like into just like doing something silly, um,
Yeah.
I think, I don't know. I sometimes feel like it's just those types of things that like catch you off guard. It's really nice that like most of our travels are done like we do bring our daughter along with, and then what is really nice about that is also like once there's a kid in the picture, the human level, like it just comes out so much more easily. And like often she'll end up meeting a kid who's like the same age who like has a stick, and they start playing with the stick because they're 4, and that's what 4-year-olds do. Like no matter where you are in the world. And so it's
Yeah.
just like once you, and then then you end up starting to chat with the parents, and then it's like you're both people with 4-year-old children, and it's just like it kind of like a lot of the other things that make you so different end up feeling, I mean, not fully erased, but just they are a bit minimized in that moment, which is
Mhm.
always what I love.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's amazing. And um, yeah, I guess kids really are kind of the best icebreakers nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually kind of on a similar note to like meeting the people who live in these places is also just there's a lot of downtime on a safari. There's it's just like you're on the game drives usually in the early morning and then in the later afternoon because basically that's when it's cooler and less sunny. So there'll just be a lot more activity. So during the daytime ends up being like a lot more chill. There's, bring books. That's actually another thing that I would definitely recommend, like bring books or like painting supplies or like whatever, kind of just like things to do during the day. And then, and also just get to chat up with the staff. And again, like having a kid just kind of like makes this a lot easier sometimes. This was one day when we were like out and, had taken a little bit of a break, and my husband and our safari driver, whose name I cannot remember, unfortunately, in the Maasai Mara, they were just like starting to do some cat cow and some like basic yoga stretches. And because our driver, he was complaining that his back was hurting, but he like didn't know any stretches. And again, that's another thing that's just so so human, right? It's like, of course, like I mean, he's a driver who's going on these bumpy roads. Of course, his back hurts. And so then just like being able to just sort of like have this super, super like deeply human moment, I think was really nice. Yeah, and again, I think just because of my daughter, we've been able to have quite a few of those, which I've been really, really fortunate for. Yeah, here's just a sweet photo of me and my daughter. And yeah, just also to say that like it's such a great thing for kids, or like, if you are traveling as like with several multi-generations or anything, like it like I do think that safari is like an activity that has something for everyone. And often like she's 4 now, but like even when she was 2 and like, was starting to talk, like she often would be the first person to spot certain animals. Like, I don't know, I think that there's something so magical that children have just like such an unfiltered view of the world. And like, as you grow older, you just start like seeing what you think benefits you versus just what actually is there. So it's actually like I feel like going on safari with her, like I know, like, for of course some of the early ones she won't necessarily remember, but I do think that her power of observation was incredible. And also that even if she doesn't necessarily remember those specific trips, like I hope it inculcates in her like a feeling of like just the joy of adventure and the joy of getting out to big open spaces, and also seeing that, like, humans aren't the only ones out there in this world.
Yeah, and that's so magical because I guess when you first moved to Nairobi, she wasn't in the picture yet, so you
No,
probably
yeah.
did some safaris before you had her, and now you're doing them still, and she's around. So yeah, it must be cool to see how the experience changes with her being there. So yeah, thank you so much for including all these pictures of
Yeah.
her.
Oh, here's just
She,
like a cute
yeah,
little another family photo. This is
yeah.
we were like against like one of those like really classically beautiful African sunsets, which don't always happen, by the way. Like I feel like there's the Lion King really kind of like put a like made everyone think that every evening ends with this like magical red and orange yellow sunset. It doesn't always, but when it does, you get some like nice golden hour photos. Yeah. Should I move on to talk about Nairobi a little bit? Or
I
just
guess one, I just wanted to mention this passage that you wrote in an article just
yeah.
because it really resonated with me and honestly kind of gave me chills and just the conversation we're having about connecting with people who have very different lives from you. I think it just is very resonant. So yeah, I was reading a recent article of yours and you wrote, "For me, travel offers a chance to constantly be proven wrong and continuously learn. My favorite moments are when I meet people and get a glimpse into their daily lives, especially when those lives are drastically different than mine, and realize that just as there are many paths up a mountain, there are infinite number of ways to construct a meaningful life." And yeah, I think that really resonated with me just because you just so eloquently put what I also love about travel. Um, but I guess I was wondering if maybe just to wrap up the safaris
Yeah.
discussion, if there's anybody you met on a safari or just in Kenya in general that you were thinking of when you wrote that, or just any magical moments that come up with that passage. I think it's really special and very eloquent.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks. Yeah. I remember writing that very, very vividly. So yeah. I'll say one person who I met recently on this the Nepal trip that I just mentioned. So yes, I went to the Khumbu region of Nepal, which is which is most famous for being home to Mount Everest, and we hiked up towards Everest Base Camp. What was really special about our trip was that we didn't follow what's called the Everest Highway, but rather took like um, much more, like narrower, lesser traveled trails, and got to visit different monasteries along the way, stay in like a lot of traditional villages, and really get to have a much more culturally rich experience. And I think what most people associate with going to that region end up actually doing. So there's this one person I'll just mention is a monk that and so my mother tongue is Hindi, and many people in Nepal speak some Hindi because there's just so much back and forth between Nepal and India. So I was very lucky to be able to communicate with people to some extent. I mean, like Hindi for them was probably like a third or fourth language, but and also the power of Bollywood movies, like they were able to just understand a bits and pieces. But yeah, so I basically there was a giant Buddhist stupa at the base of this town called Namche, and so I kind of like did a round around the stupa, which you're supposed to do clockwise, and just like kind of ask for blessings. And so I did that, and then he was just sitting there, and I somehow just started chatting with him. He was so friendly, very smiley. It's like exactly like what you would imagine a monk to be. And I actually asked him directly, like, what does it mean to live a meaningful life? And because I was like, I'm sitting with a monk, like, if I'm not going to ask him this, who else am I going to ask? And he was just like, he said that it's just like have a positive heart and always think positively when you're acting towards others. And I was like, it's such a simple message that he gave me. And one that is honestly reflected in most major religions around the world. But it's something that just feels like in practice, it's so difficult to actually actualize on a daily basis. So it was just a really nice reminder of just like returning to the simplicity. And yeah, it was just
Yeah.
like this really incredible moment that I was like, here I am sitting next to this monk.
Oh, that is amazing. And yeah, that's so stripped down. So yeah, it is pretty amazing when you know, kind of zoom out like that. Things
Yeah.
do get surprisingly simple. So
We make them more complicated
yes.
than they need to be. That's like the big thing that I've taken
Yes.
away.
Yes, I have to agree. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. That's very
Yeah.
beautiful. And you know, before we wrap things up tonight, I definitely want to go over what you would recommend booking a safari with. So, would you be able to take us through your perfect day in Nairobi?
Yeah, so yeah, just a bit of background. A lot of people who come to Kenya to do a safari vacation just sort of use Nairobi as the airport to fly in and out of. And it is it's a city that is just absolutely amazing, I think. Like there's so much going on, both in terms of culture. There's a lot of really great restaurants. One that I mentioned that I think that I shared with Ben was is called Cultiva, that is farm to table, and it's just like in a really beautiful setting, but there's many others as well, and lots of great live music, lots of great art shows. So there's a lot of culture fixes that you can get in the city, and just as you would like any European destination. And what's also really cool about the city is that and this is just like right next to where I live, is you have this beautiful old growth forest called Karura Forest. And there's like 5, 10, and 15 kilometer walking trails. There's also, you can go horseback riding there. There's waterfalls and caves. It's really magical, and it's called the lungs of Nairobi. Wangari Maathai was a Nobel Peace Prize winner in 2004, I believe, and she laid down her life in order to protect this forest. And so it's just like it has a really incredible, like complicated but really incredible history. So that's one thing I would recommend. And then something more urban that I could recommend doing is there's this really great organization called Book Bunk, that is working to restore Nairobi's like beautiful public libraries, and just I think the broader mission is to just like rethink and revamp public space so it really truly does serve the public. And so they have a library tour of Nairobi, which I think is just super cool. And like, it's like a half day tour that I went on. Like, I visited 3 different libraries in different parts of the city and got to see like different programming. And they were all really busy, which was so cool to see because like Nairobi is a city that does, to an extent, unfortunately, like exists behind private walls. There's a lot of malls and there's a lot of, things like that, but it was really nice to see that like just public space is so necessary all over the world, and just getting to kind of like also explore like this architecture that did come from the Brits actually in the case of the Macmillan Library, which is on the left, but getting to like just see these spaces in urban Africa I think is really quite special. And then also I would say that like a trip to Kenya, like I think the coastline, it has been my like most favorite discovery since I've moved there. It's just like in addition to just having, like really just being physically so beautiful, it also has like a very unique Swahili style culture, which is a blend of you have a lot of like Persian, Omani culture, of course, like the Kenyan Bantu culture, Portuguese influence, you have an Indian influence, you have a bit of a Chinese influence. So it's like across the coast, like there's just like it used to be very popular for trading, and then you see those influences today in the architecture, in the food, in everything. On the left here, there's these traditional dhow boats, which DHOW, which have like a really unique shape to them, and just taking those out at sunset is just like one of my most like it's just one of the best things that you can do, I think. And then there's other parts of the coast as well. This is Watamu, and there's a lot of different holiday homes that you can rent. I actually sent to Ben also this website called Discover Watamu and East African Retreats. So these are two holiday homes that I stayed at that if you are growing with like a group of people that you can, they'll have like 3, 4 bedrooms, and that are easy enough to rent and not very expensive, and just are really truly magical. Yeah, here's a model at that one in Watamu at the beach. Very famous model of my daughter when
Yes.
she was like 1.5 at this time. Just had to throw that in. And then also like on the coast you have these mangroves. Mangroves are incredible ecosystems also that do so much to prevent erosion and help prevent against climate change effects. And there's this creek called Mida Creek, and you can take a mangrove tour through them, and yeah, and just like kind of like touch these roots. They're really so powerful and really incredible. So yeah, I didn't know much about mangroves before living there, so there was that. And yeah, it's just a little local culture where my dad and husband joined a local pool game in Watamu. It was like very much a makeshift little situation, but these guys were awesome. They were so nice, and again, I think like getting to like explore that human connection was really quite special.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing, what would be the perfect bookends to any safari, Sarika. And I think we can move on to the question and answer
Yeah.
segment
Should I
of the
stop sharing
show.
my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. But before we do the Q&A, I have a quick word from our sponsor. And tonight, our sponsor is the Rick Steves Europe Climate Smart Commitment. So every year we invest in nonprofit organizations that fight climate change through on-the-ground work in the developing world and government advocacy in the US. And we are still accepting grants for our 2025 portfolio. Oh my goodness, excuse me. Portfolio through the end of July. So if any of you know of any NGOs that meet the parameters of our Climate Smart program, please encourage them to apply. All right, Sarika, we have a lot of questions from the audience tonight.
Great.
And I definitely am seeing a few questions about, what your move was like to Kenya and, if you had culture shock, if you have ever felt unsafe there.
Mhm.
And so I was wondering if, you could, I guess, speak to,
Gotcha.
yeah, just,
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are intimidated. A lot of Americans
Yeah,
are intimidated by
with
going
good
to Kenya.
reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, my family definitely was pretty had a lot of questions before moving. Yeah, and it was a big decision for sure. I would say that the I didn't feel quite as much culture shock as I have when I've gone to a few other places. I do think that Kenyans are quite like welcoming and kind, and it is a really chill kind of culture. Like I just for my recently my birthday, like several friends came into town from abroad, and it was their first time coming, and they all remarked like how the airport situation, for example, was just so relaxed compared to so many other countries that they had been to. So I think like, on the roads, for example, like people are like aggressive drivers, like everyone overtakes everyone, but there's almost no honking, like way less than you have in like New York or something. So it actually is a much more like chilled out sort of culture than I think what people may first imagine it to be, because it's like, I don't know, I think people have like images of what Africa is like. Um, and yeah, in terms of safety, I mean, touch wood, like nothing has happened to me. I do think that like, there's a bit of like street smarts and element to it. Don't want to be like out showing like super flashy things like out at night. just walking the streets by yourself. But I mean, that's kind of common sense anywhere, I feel. And I think that you just try to keep a lower profile in general. And yeah, but I've been very, and there's also, in addition to street smarts, I think there's just also a bit of luck that goes into that, of course, because things can happen anywhere. But I would say, like, things can happen literally anywhere. So it's just I wouldn't necessarily like avoid it for the safety purposes. I think that you can just kind of plan for it a little bit and just make sure that you're staying in a place that you feel like has some security to it. Like we do have, like, where we live, like we do have a a security guard at night, and there is a gate to get into our house, which is pretty typical. And most like hotels and stuff will have like some form of that, which hopefully will provide some bit of comfort. I always anyway like try to like double lock a hotel room door, like regardless of where I am. And like if there's a bolt, like the chain, I always put the chain, just because I took a couple of courses on, like, just staying safe as a solo woman journalist traveling different places. And I think that those habits like stay with me, like not just in certain geographies, but really just everywhere.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you brought up traveling solo as a woman because we do have some questions about, have you ever traveled, or I'm sure you have, but how much
Yeah.
have you traveled around Kenya alone? And yeah, if you have any other tips on staying safe as a woman on the road. I'm
Yeah.
about to do some traveling in London next weekend, actually. So I have been thinking a little like, oh, should I? Probably shouldn't stay out as late as I like maybe otherwise
Yeah.
would. But yeah.
I mean, I would say like any tips I have, I think could be generalized to other places as well. I don't think that there's any specific security risk with Kenya. You can enroll. So I will say that before you come, if you want to, you can enroll in, like there's an email that I get from the U.S. State Department, like when there is something that's going to happen, just like if there is an extra security alert, like from a terrorism point of view, or like recently you may have also seen in the news, like a lot of protests have been going on against the government, and some of those protests can get like the can get a bit hairy sometimes. um won't go too much into that, but yeah, so like, just to kind of steer clear of those types of areas, I would say that, like, if you were like worried on those ends, avoiding like very, very crowded public spaces is always like something that I try to do when I know that when I hear there is like any type of terrorist risk. But from a general safety perspective of, like, creeps out in the world, one tip that someone gave me, this is a really tiny one that I just like, it just, but the tiny ones sometimes just stick with you, is that I never say my hotel room number out loud in a public space. Um, and that actually it's one of those things that, like, you do it with, if you don't actually actively think not to do it, you end up saying like, oh yeah, I'm in 804, like let me just meet you there. And you never know who's around you, like who's listening. So I've just learned, like, because someone told me that very specifically, that like I just don't do that. And I think that that's like a really good safety tip as a woman. For sure, I think like a lot of it's intuition. I have heard like some creepy things about like people putting like air tags in bags and stuff. So just keeping your Bluetooth on and checking for that. That sort of stuff, so that no one's tracking you down, is great. And then I would like, the other tip I always think is, again, I think it's a bit of common sense, but it's not always followed, is like not sharing. I don't share anything about any travel I do until after I'm done with it. Just on, like, on social media, like, as I just don't want to have, I mean, not that I have like so many followers or anything, but it is like a way to attract, for people to just be able to see exactly where you're going. I never show my boarding passes on social media because, again, there's actually, you can get some personal information, because like if someone can track down your like frequent flyer mile, they can like see all sorts of personal information about you anyway. So I just like, I like, and also I don't think it's a very interesting picture. I think there's a lot more interesting pictures you can take even of an airport than your boarding pass. So yeah, so just like kind of avoiding like sharing things that show too much personal information. I think that that's like, just again, like, these are not necessarily specific for Kenya, because I personally have been, I feel lucky, but I also just don't think that Kenya is as scary as a lot of people may make it out to seem. But these are
Mhm.
just more general tips that I try to follow.
Yeah, and always always good to keep those in mind, regardless of where you are. So, yeah, thank you for sharing those. And that the hotel number thing is I've never thought of that, so definitely going to keep that in mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like this tiny thing that it's just like, but it, yeah, then like I have had someone follow me to my hotel room before and like, and try to, luckily the door was locked and like nothing happened or anything, but you just, it's just, why risk it?
Yeah, of course, of course. Well, I'm glad that you're okay.
Yeah, fine.
And I guess we can just do one more question and we'll bring it back to Safari. Um, Gregory is wondering if there is ever a guarantee of seeing the big five on a tour.
No, there is any nature-based tourism. I remember this is like I went to Hawaii with my family when I was a teenager, and we like drove up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to go see the sun, like the magical sunrise at the top of Mauna Loa. And then it was cloudy and we saw nothing. I mean, we saw it get lighter, but we did not see a sunrise. With anything nature related, there is no guarantee. You're not going to a zoo in this case. So there is just, you can do things to make it more likely to see certain animals. So, for example, being out like as early as possible, like, if you can leave before the sun rises. And so far it's like honestly the sunrises in the bush are so magical anyway. Like it's really nice to be out there when the sun is rising. But if you can go before the sun rises, get some great sunrise shots as well as be in places where like that like lions are just more likely to be out or cats are more likely, I should say, cats are more likely to be out and like, just more active before the sun really comes up. Then that can like help increase the odds. Most of the drivers that you'll have anyway have radios, and they're usually radioing other safari drivers as well, and they'll know like, oh, there's like some sighting over here, and I would also say like state your intentions at the top to your driver, like. If you're really into birds, then let them know, and then they'll make sure that like you try to see lots of birds. So I think just having that two-way communication can also help. But there's no guarantee for anything in life. So let alone like wild animals and nature. Like you're going in their house. So they'll decide if they want to come out or if they want to stay like inside their bedroom.
Yes, yes, I think very important life lesson to
Yeah.
to take away from that. All right, Sarika. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us. This has been so much fun, and I think that you've really helped to definitely for me, I'd say at least, um, build me up to go to Kenya. So,
Oh,
uh,
good. That's the
I've already
point.
texted some friends. Yeah, Kenya
Well, let
2025.
me know when you come.
Yes.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you so much for having me. I hope that this has been as fun for everyone else as it has for me. And yeah, let me know if you ever come to Kenya.
Oh, I certainly will. I
Yeah.
definitely know who to talk to. Well, yeah, just thank you again. This has been so fun, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you. You too. Okay. Bye.
Bye. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us this evening, and we will be back next week with Jeannie Carmichael, who is covering Northern Wales. So be sure to tune in for that. And as always, thanks for joining us, and happy travels.